I think one of the biggest things that nobody tells you about dating in midlife is sometimes it's not them, it's actually you. And that can be for a number of reasons. That could be because of your circumstances at the time. If you're not ready to actually see someone. And I don't think this is anything of blame. I think it's where we are in our lives at a certain time. And as always, as we always say, it's actually about timing. If you're ready to have someone in your life, I think we've become very good in relationships at looking at it that it's someone else's fault. Why am I always drawn to the wrong people? When actually, it's not the people that we're drawn to, it's the other common factor in all of those relationships, which is ourselves. Sometimes we're the ones that stop ourselves moving forward, and that could be for a number of reasons. It could be circumstances of you're spending so much time trying to get your life back together to where you want it to be, that once you've got it there, actually giving that up again is a big gamble. We don't want to. We don't want to disrupt everything again and feel like we're rebuilding our life all over again. Because when life is good, dating is harder. You're very protective of the life that you've built, the things that have become constant in your life. And you don't want to give them up for anyone because you know that they are the things that have kept you going when you've been on your own or when you've come out of a breakup or come out of a marriage or gone through a messy divorce. They're the things that have always been there that are going to keep you going. And you want those to go back to all of the time. So keeping your independence through your dating is incredibly important because you know that you're going to want that stability there again if things don't work out. Now, when we're in our 20s, we've got that. It's already there. If you're living at home with parents or whatever it may be, you might have your own place, but that's always there because you've got nothing else in your life, particularly other than just enjoying it. Now, when you're in dating in midlife, majority of people, they are going to have kids. They're going to have their own house. They are going to be working. They are going to have a family structure that they have to work around. So even getting a date sometimes is finding a day to have a date is difficult because it's like, right, I've got to pick Johnny up from school, take him to football, and then I've got to pick my daughter up and get her to dance, and then get Johnny when he's finished football, get back to there, make sure they've got their dinner, get them around my mum's or get them around my dad's or my sisters or my brothers because they're looking after the kids. And then I've got to go home, shower, get ready, meet this person I'm dating for 2 or 3 hours. And once you're there for 2 or 3 hours, in your mind, you're probably thinking, right, what have I got to do this morning? So I've got to get up or get them ready for school. So that means I've got to get some brothers, pick up the kids, and then make sure I take the uniform with me because I've got all these things that, would go through your head. And it's distracting from actually being in the date in the first place. And then when you reflect back on the day, you haven't represented yourself in any way. So the other person, maybe they're not even near. And then you could think, well, they weren't that interested. They've ghosted me again. I get this all the time on dating apps. So it's very easy to apportion blame to everything else that's going on. And it's probably a lot harder to look at ourselves and go, I think I'm the problem. I think in my dating history, I got better at realizing that I was the only common factor in a lot of these relationships that weren't working out. And that wasn't to put any blame on anyone at all. It was just me. That's all it was. It was where I was in my life in that point of time. And I think that's the same for everybody. And I think sometimes it's a lot easier to say, I always choose the wrong people, or why I'm always attracted to these sort of guys or these sort of women when actually those women, those guys, they were all the same. It was you that was just never changed. You were just taking from a relationship rather than giving into it. And I think I did that quite a lot. There were very lots of times where I was unwavering with what I did because I knew that they were going to be the things that were always going to be there for me. And I wasn't prepared to give them up to anyone because I wanted them to fit into my life rather than share a life with them. I mean, life is good. Dating's harder. You're less likely to want to go and meet someone when you think, you know, why do I need that? Why do I need that hassle? Especially if you've had a series of relationships where it's left you wanting, feeling, actually, this hasn't worked out. I've been upset and it's taken me a while to get over this guy, this girl, whatever it may be. And you're so much less likely to actually want to go towards that again because you're thinking, what did I get out of it last time? If all I'm getting out of these relationships is heartache and I'm in a good place now, why do I want to bring that, you know, into my life again? When your life is really good, someone has to add to it, not disrupt it. You don't need disruption in your life anymore, especially as you're older, because you just think, I can't be bothered with it. You get less resilient, I think, to accepting things as you get older. You're less tolerant of the bullshit because you can call people out on it because you don't need to hear it anymore. And this happens right the way through our life, I think, as we get older. And I think that's why friendships change, as you get older, because sometimes you just have enough of each other. And again, that's no one's fault. You just get to the point of where you think, like any relationship, I think we've just changed. We've both changed. You've gone one way, I've gone another way, and we've got no more common ground together. So let's just call it what it is. And you go your way, I'll go my way. And yeah, it was great while we knew each other. And life is constantly changing and life will continue to constantly change the older we get, I think. And maybe, who knows, maybe in 5, 10 years with some of these relationships that you've had with people, you'll meet up again and find that you've now got more common ground from having time away from each other because you've allowed each other to grow separately without being there all the time. When your life is already good, it's a nice place to be. It's like being on a holiday and just thinking, yeah, I'm cool now. And if someone comes up to you and says, I'm going to take you on another holiday, go and pack all your things, let's go. It's like, I can't be asked. I don't want to go and take all my stuff out, put it in another suitcase, go to another place and have another holiday when I'm fine where I am. Like, I'm just going to stay here. I'm just going to do my time here. Then I'll go home and get on with my life. So lots of the time, it's whether we're ready to actually move on and start something new as opposed to, we're not willing to. It's just like, I'm okay at the moment. Give me a breather and I'll go when I'm ready. Lots of the times it's all about timing. Sometimes you're the reason it didn't work and that's okay. And saying that is not a bad thing. I'm quite happy to look back and say, I knew I was the reason it didn't work, but there were reasons for my reasons. When Zach was growing up and when he was young, he was my first priority and no one was going to get in the way of that. Zach, grew up with me and I was making sure that I was on football every Sunday. I was always going to football. If he was playing on a Saturday, I would be at everything that he did. Parenting for me has always been about making sure you show up. If the person that I was dating was like, oh, we can go off to a market on a Sunday, I'd be like, I'm not doing it. Well, why can't you just watch your son every other week and we can go to market? Well, quite simply because he's my son and you're someone I'm dating. Now, saying it out loud sounds dreadful, doesn't it? But my priority was my son. And for me, other people coming into my life would have to recognize that and go, right, I know you do that every week, and that's cool. I respect it. In fact, I like you more for it, but that's fine. Maybe we can do something another time. And that's what it was for. For me, it was all about people fitting in with my life. I needed someone to fit in with my life. Now, as I've grown older and I've met people in my life, and now my son is sort of older as well, and I still, go and watch him if he's doing things because, it's very important to me. But when I meet people that have younger children, I'm fully aware that they'll do that as well. And at least I understand that. And I think it's about compatibility. It's about having people that have had shared experiences and understanding of what you're doing. And I remember dating, at stages in my life, especially when Zach was young, where God, it was like plate spinning. It was like you are trying to keep everyone happy, and it's absolutely exhausting. You're trying to keep your ex partner happy and them not to get the hump with you, so that then you're not arguing about who's got the kids on this day and who's got the kids on that day, and financial things that are going on as well. You're trying to keep your kids happy so they're not affected by it. And then you're trying to grow a new relationship in the process. And you're making sure that you're giving time to that. And the person that you're giving time to feels like they've got enough time and they feel like you're wanted. And then in the meantime, you're going to bed at night, just laying down on your bed thinking, Jesus Christ, like I haven't had 5 minutes to myself, and you're doing it all for the right reasons, but you get lost yourself in it sometimes, and you forget about yourself. And then I think that builds your resilience and your independence, especially, and then that becomes more valuable to you. And then once you've actually built that up, you become very protective of your own independence because you realize how long it took you to get there in the first place. So if you're in that situation now and I met you, let's say, I think I would have full understanding of that and actually say, you know what, if I have to come third or fourth in your list of priorities, I'm okay with that because I've got all the things that I do already and I can carry on with those because I realize you need to do those other three or four things before me. But I also realize it's not always going to be that way. Now, personally, I only know all of this because of experience of going through it myself and remembering what it was like. And I know from when I've dated people and speaking to women, a lot of them now are like, I'm not dating anyone with younger kids because I've done that. I've done my time. I don't want to do that. Now, for me, that was never an issue because I just think, well, if you're not going to date people with younger kids, you're cutting down the pool of your people by an awful lot. You're almost looking at 50%, if more, that you're cutting out, and that's fine. But then don't moan when you go, oh, the pool of people I'm dating has got smaller and smaller and smaller because you haven't been willing to extend it by any more because of the parameters that you're setting the people that you want. And that's completely your prerogative, obviously. But again, we can't moan about things that we do ourselves, and expect other people to give us sympathy for it because we have to look at what we're doing. And it's not always about other people. On social media now, I'm constantly seeing, these self talks and, women and guys and telling us all that, it's everyone else's fault and you deserve someone that sees you. And of course we do. But at the same time, we need to see ourselves as well. We need to know what we're like in our own person and not keep apportioning blame to everyone else and then label it with gaslighting, this and that. And there are obviously circumstances where that's completely applicable, but we use them far too liberally now for watered down versions of what that actually looks like. And then that detracts from the people that are actually experiencing those things as well, because when they're telling their story, people will go to them, oh, I've experienced that. And it's like, Well, you haven't. You've just experienced something that was very like, watered down of what it actually was. And then when we're not actually facing ourselves and looking at ourselves in the mirror and going, what's my role in this? What have I contributed to the downfall of this relationship? Or have I been the sole downfall of this relationship? When we're not looking at that, we're not growing ourselves. We're not taking any responsibility for it at all. And there's always times when, cases where you look and go, well, actually, that wasn't down to me. That was down to them. I get that. But I think when there's two people in a relationship, there's always two sides to every story. Everyone will have their own points of view because none of us are the baddie in our own stories. We are all heroes in our own stories a lot of the time. And it's very difficult, I think, to go, actually, it's me. I'm the problem sometimes. And when we say about timing, it's also financial, especially for guys. I found this an awful lot. When I was rebuilding my life and my house, and I was putting so much into that I didn't have the money to date because as much as women will say, and you all out there will say, oh, we'll pay our way. I know you do, but there is an expectation from a lot of women that will expect you to be picking up the check all the time, and you will be judged for it. Make no mistake, by a lot of them. Now, the ones that don't are very independent women, and I was always drawn to independent women anyway, but there is always an expectation of it. Sometimes it's a case of like, financially at the moment, I cannot afford to date. I cannot afford to be going out spending 150 pound on a meal and then doing it again a couple of weeks later, because that's what it looks like. And it makes me laugh now that when I look at, you know, uh, Zach's friends, they'll take first dates to the Ivy and, they're spending £300-400 on a date and not thinking anything of it. And this is a first date that they may not even see the girl again. To me, I'm thinking, where'd you go from there? Like, where's your second date? After doing that, you haven't even built up to that. It's like your first date, we're going to go to the Ivy because that's how I roll. Oh, brilliant. Where's your second and third date going? Maybe I should start dating. Yeah, start dating again in my 20s. I think I'd have really struggled. But there's an expectation, and that comes from everything, doesn't it? That comes from the expectation of where we're posting our dates, and I'm here, and look at me, I'm outside this great restaurant and this great restaurant, and it's great doing that with people that you're in full relationships with. You've been there you've been in it 3 or 4 months, but it's not the first or second date. And I think also with circumstances, you do in midlife, I think you do look long term very early on, which you don't when you're younger. I think, for me, my situation. So when I was meeting people and I was thinking, right, so I've got my house, I've got everything in my life kind of sorted, for want of a better word, but I've got my house, you've got your house. Is any of us moving? Like, are you moving to mine, or am I going to move yours? Because I don't want to sell my house. I'm not selling my house. And if the other person thinks exactly the same, then you've got to come to the compromise of what we spoke about before in the podcast, is about having relationships where you retain your independence. You can live together in each other's houses, but you keep your own house and they keep their own house. So if it all goes wrong, hopefully not, we don't go into things hoping they're all going to go wrong. But if it doesn't go right, you can still go back to that. So you still keep that independence. And that's really important. So the financial aspects of relationships in midlife, become far more complicated, I think, of who is where and who's doing what. The uncomfortable truth is always in many things is the stuff that we probably don't want to say to ourselves. We definitely don't want to say out loud. But for me, there are times that women came into my life and made it better. I didn't make theirs better. I didn't give anything back to them. They were coming in on a timetabled version of what I needed in my life, like little windows that I had free when I wasn't doing all of the things that I've put in place to make me strong as a single person with my son. And so I'd have these little openings that would, well, if you can do then, that's great. And I was quite unwavering with that as well, in terms of, if that didn't suit them, okay, that's fine. That's not a problem for me. But if it's a problem for you, I'm sorry. And independence can actually ruin relationships, especially when one person is extremely independent and not wavering for not bad reasons either. I know if I went back again in my life, I would do 95% of the same shit all over again, because I make decisions based on what I know at the time and what I feel is right at the time. So if I went back, I would make the same decisions again, because there was very few decisions that I ever made where I thought, this is a mistake, don't make this decision. And I did. And I would make them all again. So the mistakes that I've made been not through blame or negligence. They're just because I made the wrong decision, and I'd make the same wrong decision again every time, because I base it upon what I want at that time in my life and what my life needs and what's good for my life. Fundamentally, I think, we're all selfish in a way that we want happiness for ourselves. And sometimes that becomes at the expense of other people. And that happens a lot in relationships. If you're in an unhappy relationship, you have to make the incredibly difficult decision of maybe breaking someone's heart to find happiness for yourself. Now, ultimately, I would say you're making the right decision for both parties, not just for yourself. So in some ways, it's selfish, but it's also unselfish, because you're allowing that person to meet the person for them that will care about them. Lots of people stay where they are. Lots of people aren't brave enough to make that decision, and they don't want to hurt someone else. They do not want to see that person in their life, being that hurt and it being their fault. So they stay, and they become an unhappy person within. Maybe they'll find happiness again later on in that relationship, because maybe they'll, drift apart and get back together. And hopefully that will work out right for them. And like I say, you'd probably make the same decision if you went back there again. But ultimately, I think we are all kind of selfish in our own way. And there were always constants in my life that helped me. There was always, for me, it was football, Zach, work. They were always constants in my life, and family. So I always, was able to, use those things, and they became so important to me that I was never giving those up, because I was thinking, right, you've been in my life for 6 months. These things have been in my life for 40 odd years. So, I know those things are always going to be there for me. I don't know you yet. I've known you 6 months, and my experience tells me after 6 months, you don't really know anyone. I think it takes a hell of a long time to know anyone 60%, because we all do things that we don't expect ourselves to do. How often has we said, I'm surprised I did that myself? Now, if you're surprising yourself that you do things, how the hell is anyone else going to know when you're going to do these things? Because, it takes a long time to know someone 80%. And I don't think you'll ever know someone inside out 20% when they can still surprise themselves. Independence can work against you in so many ways, because you're so fed up with that plate spinning that you just think, enough of this. I'm going to concentrate on these 2 plates, and I'm going to keep them going. And I'm happy with that, because I can maintain this. I'm not entertaining a third one, because it's going to make these 2 fall off. So I'm going to forego anything else that's coming in, and I'm just going to concentrate on the ones that are here. I got used to people fitting in with my life rather than me building a life together with them. Looking back now, they wanted to build lives, and they were in a position to build lives, and I just wasn't. I was still trying to pick up the pieces of my own life and where it had fallen apart before, and I wasn't ready to build anything new. I wanted to put stuff back together, And I think that's what we need to do is put everything back together before we even think about rebuilding anything else with anyone else. And I met some great women that I look back now and think it was just bad timing. I don't regret how they worked out, because they would have always worked out that way, because that's where I met them in that point of my life. If I'd have met them now, could have been a completely different story, but I didn't. And you meet these people in your life when you do. You've got no control over that whatsoever. You can't dictate when these people come in and out your life, and they can't dictate when you come to their life. And you may think, this is perfect timing for a different year. It's just wrong now. And I think that I wasn't ready for relationships that came in, but they moved me forward. And that was probably the purpose of those. And I'm sure that I hurt people along the way without intention. And I would do the same again, unfortunately, because the priorities in my life that hurt them will always come before them. Your kids, for me, will always come before. It was very interesting. There was parents of a girl that broke up with me, and I was, devastated by this. And I remember having a conversation with her mum. I think I was dropping some stuff off, and I already had Zach, and this couple had met when they were young in school, been together. They'd had 3 kids, and their life, was probably a perfect life as to what you perceive a relationship to be from the outside. Meet young, stay together, strong family bond, 3 kids. And I remember saying to her, this other person just didn't understand that, Zach was always going to come first. And I said, but you understand that because you've got kids. And she looked at me and she said, my kids don't come before my husband. My husband will always come before my kids. And it always stuck with me, that. And I always thought, is that because you've had a relationship before kids? And is that the difference? And I wonder if I would have seen it different if I'd have had kids with someone and stayed with them because there was a strong bond with someone, and then you had those kids. So it came in that order. And I also wonder, on reflection, if she'd have had her kids and had a divorce, let's say, and then met someone else, whether she'd looked at it differently. So I think your relationship setup and your relationship experience will always dictate how you see your priorities as well. So I think when we look back, or where you are now, even if you're looking at your relationships now, is think why things didn't work. For me, I wanted someone now, but only when that suited me, only when those windows of opportunity were there. And I thought, do you know what? It'd be nice to do this now. I think, who knows, in years to come, maybe there'll be these AI bots that we'll have in the cupboards that they'll be our relationship. And when we're ready, we'll go to the cupboard, we'll open them up, we'll turn them on, and then we'll have this, ideal relationship until we're ready to put it back in the cupboard again. And that will be the way that relationships will move forward. Maybe it will be where we just have different relationships coming in and out of our life, and we'll accept that for what they are. Relationships that may be just like contracts of, this is going to be a 2-year thing. I've spoke before, with marriages. I wonder how marriages will work if every 2 to 3 years you renegotiated your contract and said, right, our contract's coming to an end now. In our relationship, what do you think? Are we going to carry on? And there'll be a negotiation. Like, do you know what? I'm not getting this out of it anymore. I'm not getting this out of it anymore. For me, I don't want to continue. And maybe there's a negotiation about how that moves forward. Or should we be doing this in relationships all the time? Should we always be sitting down with each other after sort of, I don't know, a year, 6 months, whatever it may be, and sort of saying, how's this going for you? Are you getting what you want out of this relationship anymore? Is there anything more I can do? I'd like you to do more of this for me. And I wonder how things would work if we approached them more in a contractual way of whether both the people in the relationship want to move forward with it. I think if I'd have done that in lots of my past relationships, maybe they'd have just ended sooner, quite honestly, because I don't think I would have negotiated anything because, again, it's where we are. So I think in summary of all of this today, this episode is about looking at what your effect has been on your life and your relationships, not being so quick to turn around and blame everyone else and say, why do I always choose the wrong people? Because maybe the people weren't wrong. Maybe it was just you were in the wrong place at that time to meet these people. And the patterns of behavior that developed weren't the other people. The patterns of the behavior that developed were always because of you. The way that you acted maybe brought out these endings to the relationship. And that's why they ended all the same. And you always thought, why am I always meeting narcissists? Maybe you're not, but maybe the way that you act brings out narcissistic traits in other people that you then perceive that that's them, when in fact, that's just because that could be you. Maybe you're not giving enough, like me. Maybe you didn't give enough to the relationship. And then in the end, that person just got fed up with it and thought, you know what? You're not giving me absolutely anything. So that caused them to act a certain way that you then perceive as you're always meeting the same sort of characters in your life, when actually you're not. You're just acting the same way. And this is all relative to dating, not long-term relationships. This is all relative to sort of the dating apps when you're saying, I'm always getting ghosted. And maybe that is, but maybe, look at what you're putting out there in the first place and get someone else to look at it. Someone who's not your friend that is going to tell you what you want to hear. Get someone that will tell you the truth that may hurt, because let's be honest, sometimes the truth does hurt. I'm very lucky enough with Zach. Zach will always pull me up on a lot of my crap and go, that's wrong, Dad. You can't do that. You can't say that. And what you've done there is wrong. And you always need that barometer of someone in your life that is going to pull you up on it. And I think without that, especially if you're an independent person that is on your own a lot, you can fall into the trap of finding a lot of things that aren't your fault. But lots of the time, we are the only constant in our life. And sometimes we've got to be big enough and brave enough to go, it's not always them. Sometimes it is me. And at the same time, you've got to be fine with that. You've got to own that. Go, I know that was me, but that's okay, because that's where I was in my life at that time. I honestly don't think in dating, in relationships, people go out of their way to be nasty to people or hurt people. I think we're all just trying to find our way, trying to find that one person, but in the meantime, keep our own independence intact and also keep our own happiness and our own plate spinning. The 2 or 3 plates that we know that we've got, we just want to keep those spinning. And if we're going to add anything more, we've got to be damn sure we've got everything locked down first of all. So be kind to yourself, but at the same time, recognize what you could do in your life to help yourself. Guys, thank you for listening today to 50 Shades in Grey. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you follow, and make sure you like all our stuff. And you can contact us through all of our platforms, and we'll look to answer any questions that we get. But thank you again for following. Take care. Bye-bye.